now, folks. I'm Nick, and today we're taking a look at Forbidden Island. This is from Gamewright and designed by Matt Laycock, who you probably know better for Pandemic. Now, this is also a cooperative game like Pandemic, but it's seen as more of an entry-level cooperative game. Basically, 2 to 4 players are teaming up as a group of adventurers who are exploring the titular Forbidden Island and trying to gather these treasures, and as they're gathering the treasures, the island is sinking. So you need to work together with your team to get all the treasures, make sure no one dies, and get to your helicopter, get to the chopper, and get out with all of the treasures in tow. So this is, like I said, this is a few years old, and it's more of an entry-level co-op, but does it stand up to all the other cooperative games that have come out since? And there have been a lot. And does it stand up to Pandemic, which was the designer's most popular game? Well, let's take a look at the game. We'll come back, and I'll tell you what I think. So gameplay in Forbidden Island is very simple, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview. So you're going to take all the tiles that come with the game, and you're going to randomize them and put them out in an assortment just like this. All the tiles have pictures on them, and they all have a flooded side as well. But some of them have some different pictures on it, like the symbols corresponding to the different treasures that the adventurers are trying to gain to escape the island with. And there's also little symbols representing the players' pawns, and that's where their starting positions are going to be. Now, you also are going to have these 4 treasures that you're just going to lay out somewhere on the board, which are just going to be reminders that this is what you're working towards. So every time you gain a treasure, you'll take the appropriate one. So you're going to randomly distribute the player roles to the 2 to 4 players. There's 6 different roles, but you're only going to have 2 to 4 depending on the number of players. And they all kind of look like this. And every adventurer card has a different special ability. So the pilot can, once per turn, fly to any square on the island, or the engineer can shore up 2 tiles for 1 action. Once you determine which player is which adventurer, then gameplay can begin. So there's a few different things you need to decide. First, decide the difficulty level. This is the water rise mark, and we're going to start off at normal. And every time there's a flood phase, wherever difficulty level you're at, wherever you're at on this grid is how many cards you're going to draw. So at the beginning, we're still in normal, we're going to draw 2 cards. After everyone's determined what adventures they are, they're going to get starting treasure cards, and treasure cards come in a few different flavors. Most of them represent the different treasures that you're trying to gain during the game. Now you have to acquire sets of 4 of one type of treasure in order to gain that treasure. Then you're going to move to the appropriate spot on the board that has that treasure symbol. There's 2 tiles for every treasure. If you've got the 4 cards and you're on one of those tiles, you get to trade in for a treasure and you're one step closer to victory. There are other types of cards in the deck as well that could be beneficial, such as sandbags, which will let you shore up a tile anytime you want, anywhere you want. And the helicopter lift, which will not only be beneficial for moving you around the island, but it is the win condition card. In order to win the game, you need to have all 4 treasures and use the helicopter lift at the Fool's Landing tile. Unfortunately, there's also the Water's Rise card. Now, when the Water's Rise card is drawn, not only do you have to raise the water level up 1 tick, which could mean that you're drawing more cards during the flooding stage, but all the flooding cards that you already drew are going to get shuffled and put back on top of the deck, which means they're going to get drawn again very quickly. So what exactly are the flooding cards and why are they bad? Well, at the start of the game, you're going to flip over these flood cards that look like that on the back, and which have pictures that correspond to every single tile in the game. So there you've got the Iron Gate and the Cave of Embers. And when you draw any of those appropriate tiles, whether at the beginning of the game or during the course of the game when you have the flood phase, you're going to flip over one of those tiles to its flooded side. So Temple of the Moon, Coral Palace, Cave of Embers. Now, when a Water's Rise card gets drawn and those get shuffled back onto the top of the deck, if they get drawn again and you have not used an action to shore up those tiles to flip them over to their unflooded side, and they're already flooded, then those tiles are removed from the game. They become permanently flooded, which could be bad. If you have not managed to take a treasure and 2 of the corresponding treasure tiles sink, then you cannot win the game because you cannot gain that treasure. It's also possible that a tile will completely flood while there's a player pawn, which, if all the tiles around are flooded, might actually kill that player, and again, the players lose the game. If too many Water's Rise cards are drawn, then you hit the skull and crossbones at the top of the Water's Rise marker, and everybody loses. The only way that you win the game is by each player working together to take the 4 treasures by turning in the sets of cards, and then every player getting back to Fool's Landing and using a helicopter lift to escape. On your turn, you can move with one of your actions. You can shore up, which is to flip a flooded tile back to its unflooded side. You can trade cards, and you can turn in cards. And that's basically how you play the game Forbidden Island. It's worth noting that Forbidden Island was one of the first games that I actually played when I started really getting into board games. I'd played board games before, but I mean, when I really got hardcore into the hobby, when I started my group, this was like the first co-op, actually, that I had in my collection. And so I really have a lot of attachment to it. And there's a lot to love about Forbidden Island. It's a great game. It really is. It's got great production values. I love the little miniatures for the parts. They could have just used cardboard tokens, but they didn't. They went that extra mile, and they had those little bits. And they probably did it to make it more appealing to, you know, families that had kids. I get that, but, you know, for nerdy adult gamers like myself, I love that stuff too. The cards are high quality. The tiles are awesome. And so all that is solid. I don't know how I feel about tins, but it's a tin, and it looks nice on a shelf until you don't know how to stack it, because it won't even stack with other tins. So that's all really solid. The gameplay itself is solid as well. You know, it's very... The theme... It's tough to say whether it's got a great theme or not, because, the island sinking, you don't necessarily really feel that way because you're just flipping tiles over. You get it, I mean, with the Water's Rising cards, but there's probably not enough to the game for you to really have that theme come out. If it was a little bit bigger and a little bit grander, maybe, but, for what it does, it works well. And, the different roles are pretty clearly defined. They're not too complicated like the Explorer and, the Messenger, but they're all pretty useful, and there isn't really a role that stands out as super useful as opposed to the others. I would say that the guy who can pop over 2 tiles as opposed to just one is very, very useful. But we've gotten along without him before too. I've played a lot of games of Forbidden Island. The game is not very challenging. I would say that on novice or normal or the next step up, I think is hard. If you're familiar with co-ops at all, if you're a pretty experienced board gamer, you're going to do just fine. It's not a very difficult game to win. It's a pretty hard game to lose. Now, on Legendary level, I would actually think that it gets too hard. In other words, it's not as balanced as the others. The difficulty really amps up, but it's still not that tough. I've played some really hard co-ops, and that doesn't really rise to that occasion. It's certainly not like playing Pandemic on the highest level. And really, speaking of Pandemic, when I got Pandemic, which was not too long after I got Forbidden Island, I started thinking about, well, I guess I don't need to have Forbidden Island anymore. That's kind of the problem with the game, is that I mentioned at the beginning that this is like an entry-level co-op. That's how many people see it, and that's pretty accurate. Once you're into that genre, once you've decided that you like co-ops or you don't, and if you do like them and you decide to pursue it, you have a lot of better options. And that's not taking anything away from what Forbidden Island is, but it means that it doesn't have a lot of longevity. I'm actually considering whether or not I want to take it out of my collection just because I have better options now. But I just have the sentimental attachment to it, and it does look good on my shelf. And like I said, there's nothing thematically wrong with the game, but the core mechanics of it are pretty much the same as Pandemic. But Pandemic, to me, has a much better theme, even though it might not look as nice, even with the new edition. I do think the theme is better of wiping out these diseases. It's certainly more exciting, and it's much more tense. And with the expansions, you have more options. There was never any expansions for Forbidden Island, so it kind of feels like a game that's just stuck in place. But you can get it very cheap now, and it is a nice game for kids. It's a great game for kids and for families who may not want that tenseness that Pandemic or Yggdrasil gives you, who want to win every once in a while on the normal or hard difficulties. I recommend this to people who are looking for a very nice, very simple co-op. For people who are already used to co-ops and are looking for something else and you haven't played this yet, you probably don't need to. You're probably fine. But it's a good game, it's a solid game, and I would recommend it for the right group of people. That's Forbidden Island. My name is Nick. This is Board Game Brawl. Signing off. Get out there and game every day and every